They thought burying my yard under mountains of filthy, contaminated snow would finally break me. HOA President Karen Whitmore stood on her porch at dawn, sipping coffee and smirking at the chaos her convoy of plows and dump trucks created. Little did she know, she'd just handed me the perfect revenge. 6 a.m., Tuesday, freezing cold. I'm Rex Donovan, single dad, master electrician, and now Karen's worst nightmare. My front yard, buried under 10 feet of toxic gray slush. The stench hits hard: diesel, road salt, dog piss, rotting trash. Cigarette butts and McDonald's wrappers float in the filth. Lawn shredded by plows. Work truck completely buried. Emergency generator repair at the children's hospital delayed. I can't even get out. There she is, Karen in her robe, admiring her victory. She weaponized winter against me. Big mistake. What would you do if your HOA illegally dumped tons of contaminated snow just to spite you? Comment below, because Karen was about to learn why you never piss off an electrician, with a whole street to shut down. Using nothing but her own snow and a little electrical know-how, I turned their weapon against the entire neighborhood. Her freak out when she realized what I'd done? Absolutely legendary. 3 months ago, I made the classic mistake of thinking an HOA president was just some bored retiree with too much time on her hands. Boy, was I wrong. I'm Rex Donovan, 47, divorced electrician, who thought he'd found the perfect quiet corner of suburbia. After my marriage crashed and burned, I bought this modest ranch house on the edge of Maplewood Estates. Nothing fancy, but it had good bones and was perfect for weekend visits with my teenage daughter Zoe. The house sat on a corner lot with some breathing room from the main development, or so I thought. The neighborhood seemed like paradise, upper-middle-class suburban dream, with tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and the kind of place where kids still ride bikes without getting kidnapped. The morning air always smelled like fresh coffee and someone's expensive lawn fertilizer. I figured I'd keep my head down, pay my HOA dues, and live peacefully ever after. Then I met the neighborhood's very own dictator and designer heels, Karen Whitmore, early 60s, blonde hair shellacked into submission, drives a white Lexus SUV that gleams like a weapon. Real estate agent by day, petty tyrant by calling. For 8 years, she's ruled Maplewood Estates like her personal fiefdom. You can smell her coming, expensive perfume mixed with the scent of fresh intimidation. Her marble entryway echoes with the sharp click of heels that announce, "I own this place." Her husband Doug sits on the city council, feeding Karen's delusions of actual political power. Their house looks like a magazine spread. Not a single leaf dares land on that perfect lawn without permission. The circular driveway screams money and superiority in equal measure. Here's a fun fact. Karen's made a career out of selective HOA enforcement. She's got an eye for targeting anyone who doesn't fit her vision of suburban perfection, which apparently doesn't include electricians who work for a living. My first encounter with Hurricane Karen came over my work truck. Clean white Ford F-250 with Donovan Electrical Services, professionally lettered on the sides. I'd parked it in my own driveway after a long day rewiring a downtown restaurant. The truck bed still smelled like sawdust and electrical wire, honest work smells. Wednesday morning, violation notice taped to my door. The paper made an expensive crinkle as I read. Commercial vehicle violation of Community Covenant Section 12.3. I knocked on Karen's door that evening. She answered wearing a silk blouse that cost more than my truck payment, looking at me like I'd stepped in something unpleasant. The covenant clearly states no commercial vehicles, she announced from her throne. Doorway. I pulled out my copy of the thick, expensive-feeling covenant pages. Section 12.3 prohibits overnight parking of commercial vehicles on streets. Last I checked, my driveway isn't a street. Her smile could freeze antifreeze. The intent is obvious. This is a residential area, not a contractor parking lot. I glanced around. Bob Martinez's plumbing van sat 2 houses down. Mrs. Peterson had a landscaping trailer. Karen's own son regularly parked his girlfriend's catering van in their driveway. The selective enforcement was so obvious, it was almost funny. "What about those vehicles?" I asked. "Temporary situations," Karen replied with that special tone reserved for explaining things to particularly slow children. Knowing small-town politics, I paid the $150 fine and started street parking. Should have been end of story. but Karen had drawn blood and liked the taste. 2 weeks later, Bob got cited for an oil stain. Mrs. Violet received a violation for her grandmother's Taiwan prayer flags, non-conforming decorative elements. The pattern was crystal clear. Working-class residents got hammered while the doctors and lawyers skated free. That's when I started my evening walks, boots crunching on perfect suburban gravel, documenting every ignored violation in the upscale sections. Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was running a systematic campaign against anyone who threatened her country club fantasy. The sound of my pen scratching notes in the growing darkness should have been her first warning. Some people bend under pressure. Others take very detailed notes and wait for the perfect moment to strike back. Karen's next target was my daughter's happiness, and that's when this stopped being about parking spots and started being personal war. It was a crisp Saturday morning in December when Zoe bounced out for her weekend visit, 15-year-old energy radiating, despite the divorce drama weighing on both of us. She'd been asking for months to set up her portable basketball hoop, one of those adjustable ones on wheels that you can move around like a shopping cart with athletic aspirations. We rolled it to the end of the driveway, and Zoe started practicing free throws. The satisfying thump-bounce-thump of ball on concrete, mixed with her genuine laughter, was the best sound I'd heard since the divorce papers were signed. For 20 glorious minutes, everything felt normal. Like maybe this whole HOA nightmare would blow over, and we could just be a regular family figuring things out. Then came the ominous click, click, click of designer heels on asphalt. Karen emerged from her fortress like a suburban heat-seeking missile, still in her silk bathrobe, but somehow managing to look more intimidating than most people in full business armor. The morning air carried her usual cloud of expensive perfume, mixed with what I was learning to recognize as the distinct scent of impending bureaucratic warfare. Kind of like ozone before a thunderstorm, but more expensive. "Excuse me," she called out, voice dripping with that special fake honey sweetness that means you're about to get royally screwed. That recreational equipment needs immediate removal. Zoe froze mid-shot, basketball suspended in her hands like an orange planet. The look on her face, pure teenage confusion mixed with secondhand embarrassment, made something cold and angry settle in my gut. "It's a basketball hoop," I said, walking over with my hands deliberately relaxed. Years of electrical work had taught me that staying calm in crisis situations keeps people from getting electrocuted. Same principle applies to HOA encounters. Portable, not permanently installed. Karen whipped out her iPhone and started snapping photos like she'd discovered a crack house. Community Covenant Section 8.7 explicitly prohibits recreational equipment in front yards or driveways. You have 24 hours to remove it or face a $200 fine. The irony wasn't lost on me. My ex-wife used to complain that I noticed too many details for my own good. Occupational hazard of being an electrician. Miss one detail, someone dies. So during my evening walks, I'd been cataloging every house in our little suburban paradise like a methodical maniac. The metallic scrape of my tape measure against concrete had become my meditation soundtrack. "Interesting," I said, "because the Hendersons have a hoop right in their front driveway. The Millers, too. And your son Tyler has that whole basketball court addition behind your house." Karen's smile flickered like a fluorescent bulb about to burn out. "Those are grandfathered installations with proper approval. Show me Tyler's approval paperwork, then." Now here's something I'd learned from years of dealing with building inspectors and permit offices. When bureaucrats start stammering about proper procedures, it usually means they're making shit up as they go along. The pause stretched long enough for Mrs. Violet to drive by in her ancient Honda, slowing down to rubberneck our little suburban drama like it was a 3-car pileup. "I don't have to justify legitimate installations to troublemakers," Karen finally spat. That night, after Zoe went to bed early and quiet, the way kids do when adult stupidity ruins their fun, I channeled my inner obsessive-compulsive detective. I loaded up my truck with a camera, measuring tape, and the kind of grim determination that keeps electricians working in 100-degree attics. The diesel engine's low rumble was oddly therapeutic, as I methodically cruised every street in Maplewood Estates, documenting the breathtaking hypocrisy. 7 houses with front yard basketball equipment. 0 violation notices. The Hendersons' hoop was actually 18 inches closer to the street than ours. The Millers had added a permanent backboard that definitely wasn't original to their 2019 purchase. And Tyler's Court? A gorgeous concrete pad with professional LED lighting that had magically appeared without leaving any paper trail in the HOA files. Monday morning, I filed a formal complaint citing selective enforcement and demanding Karen recuse herself for conflict of interest. I CC'd her city councilman husband, figuring Doug might want to know his wife was creating lawsuit bait for the entire community. Karen's response was swift, nuclear, and beautifully illegal. She called an emergency HOA board meeting for Wednesday, except my obsessive research into community bylaws had revealed that emergency meetings need 72 hours notice unless someone's literally bleeding. Basketball hoops don't qualify as imminent safety threats, despite what suburban dictators might claim. Wednesday evening, the community center reeked of industrial carpet cleaner and decades of petty committee warfare. Karen had arranged the chairs like a kangaroo court, complete with a wooden gavel she'd obviously bought to feed her power fantasies. This emergency session addresses Rex Donovan's harassment and frivolous documentation, she announced to the dozen residents brave enough to witness the execution. I stood up, pulled out my highlighted copy of the bylaws, and smiled. Point of order. Emergency meetings require 72 hours notice per Section 4.2, unless there's imminent danger. Basket hoops don't count. The fluorescent lights hummed in the dead silence, which means any decisions tonight are legally worthless. Karen's face went through more color changes than a mood ring in a microwave. She just learned why you never pick fights with people who actually read the fine print. Karen's retaliation arrived like a precision missile disguised as paperwork, proving that suburban warfare requires both creativity and a complete lack of shame. 2 weeks after her illegal emergency meeting dissolved into gavel-packing fury, I came home to find a professional surveyor turning my front yard into a crime scene. This guy was decked out in orange safety gear, like he was preparing to defuse a bomb, instead of measure my perfectly innocent fence line. His laser equipment beeped incessantly, creating a soundtrack that sounded like my smoke detector having an anxiety attack. Property line survey, he explained when I asked, not bothering to look up from his space-age measuring device. Neighbor complaint about fence encroachment. My fence. The same 6-foot privacy barrier that had stood in peaceful compliance since 2018, installed by the previous owner with proper permits and the kind of German engineering precision that would make a BMW jealous. Karen had walked past this fence literally hundreds of times during her royal patrols without ever noticing its existence. The survey cost me $800 I didn't have, because single dad electrician salary doesn't exactly include a petty HOA lawsuit line item in the budget. But the results were poetry. My fence sat exactly where it belonged, with a comfortable 3-inch buffer inside my property line. Karen's complaint was pure, documented harassment that any decent lawyer would frame and hang on their wall. But our suburban dictator was just getting warmed up. The next attack arrived via certified mail, which ranks right up there with IRS audits and colonoscopies on the list of things that ruin your day. The envelope felt expensive and threatening as I tore it open to discover Karen's latest masterpiece. My mailbox was apparently positioned 2 inches too close to the street. According to her newest creative interpretation of reality, this violated the aesthetic uniformity requirements of Section 15.2, which, fun fact, doesn't actually exist in our covenant. I know because I'd memorized that document like an electrician memorizes voltage codes. Miss one detail, people get hurt. Here's where it gets hilarious. My mailbox had been installed by the Postal Service itself, positioned according to federal regulations by people who do this for a living. When I called to verify, the conversation was exactly what you'd expect. Sir, that mailbox meets all federal postal requirements. If someone has an issue with it, they can file a complaint with the United States government. Karen apparently decided the U.S. Postal Service was wrong and filed a city complaint anyway. Because nothing screams rational community leadership like declaring war on mail delivery. That's when I discovered I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Misery doesn't just love company, it builds resistance networks that would make the French underground proud. Mrs. Violet's kitchen smelled like jasmine tea and justified rage as she described Karen's attempt to ban her grandmother's prayer flags. Apparently, these beautiful silk banners violated cultural consistency standards, a regulation that exists nowhere except in Karen's discrimination handbook. The flags fluttered gently outside Mrs. Violet's window as we talked, their bright colors defiant against the beige conformity Karen demanded. Bob Martinez shared his war stories over beers that tasted like solidarity and shared frustration. Karen had nailed him with a $500 fine. For an oil spot, you needed a magnifying glass to find. Meanwhile, the retired cardiologist's vintage Porsche leaked fluids like a sinking ship without ever receiving so much as a warning glance. The pattern reeked worse than week-old fish. Systematic targeting of minorities and blue-collar workers, while the white-collar elite floated through violations like untouchable royalty. But here's where Karen's amateur hour corruption started creating beautiful, career-ending problems. During my late-night research sessions, fueled by righteous anger and enough coffee to power a small town, I'd stumbled across something that made my electrician's detail-obsessed brain practically vibrate with excitement. Karen had been weaponizing HOA violations to drum up real estate business. The timeline was gorgeous in its transparency. Violation notices would mysteriously appear right before houses hit the market, followed by Karen's business cards showing up in mailboxes, offering to help navigate complex HOA processes for potential buyers. My dining room table had transformed into a detective's evidence board that would make any forensic accountant weep with professional admiration. Printed emails, violation notices, and a growing spreadsheet of corruption covered every surface. The smell of printer ink and highlighter markers had become my new signature scent. But then came Karen's nuclear option, and her biggest tactical error. She filed a complaint claiming I'd forged her signature on a made-up agreement about temporary snow storage on my property. Insurance fraud, falsification of documents, the works. Except I had security. The woman had just handed me enough ammunition to end her HOA career, and possibly her real estate license. Some people really can't help themselves when they think they're winning. Watching someone dig their own grave with expensive stationery and a complete lack of impulse control? Priceless. February arrived in Minnesota like a vindictive ex-wife with a lawyer. Cold, calculating, and absolutely determined to destroy everything you hold dear. Mother Nature was about to become Karen's unwitting accomplice in the most spectacular act of suburban terrorism ever documented on security cameras. The blizzard hammered us Monday night, dumping 18 inches of the heavy, wet snow that makes strong men cry, and turned snow removal into a billion-dollar industry. By Tuesday morning, the city had contracted with our HOA for private road clearing. Routine winter business that usually meant hauling snow to designated dump sites outside residential areas. Karen Whitmore had much more creative plans. I jolted awake at 3 a.m. to the rumble of diesel engines that sounded like a military convoy preparing for invasion. The deep growl of multiple trucks, mixed with the metallic scraping of industrial plow blades, created a mechanical symphony that made my electrician's danger instincts scream, "Code Red Emergency." Stumbling to the window, I witnessed suburban warfare at its finest. Karen stood in her heated driveway, like Napoleon commanding the Battle of Austerlitz, directing a convoy of city snowplows. The city authorized temporary storage pending spring disposal. 12 dump trucks, 4 snowplows, all working in perfect coordination to create Mount Doom in my front yard. But this wasn't the clean white snow from suburban streets. This was the toxic gray sludge from major thoroughfares, contaminated with everything that makes city snow removal a hazardous waste operation. The acrid stench of diesel exhaust mixed with road salt, motor oil, cigarette butts, fast food containers, and what my nose insisted was actual sewage from storm drains. By 6 a.m., my property looked like the aftermath of an environmental disaster designed by someone with serious psychological issues. The contaminated mountain stretched from my front door to the street, completely entombing my work truck and creating an impenetrable 8-foot barrier. Deep plow gouges scarred my lawn like claw marks from some mechanical beast. The smell alone could have been classified as chemical warfare, a toxic cocktail that burned your nostrils and made your eyes stream. McDonald's wrappers and cigarette butts dotted the gray surface like confetti from Hell's own parade. Then my phone rang. Children's Hospital, emergency generator failure. They needed me there immediately. Power backup systems don't fix themselves, and pediatric patients don't do well when life support equipment stops working. "I can't even get out of my driveway," I told the maintenance supervisor, staring at the toxic mountain blocking my truck. "Someone buried my house under contaminated snow." That's when the beautiful irony hit me like a lightning bolt. See, electrical work teaches you to think in systems, how power flows, where circuits can be redirected, what happens when you change the path of least resistance. Years ago, I'd worked on a flood mitigation project that used industrial pumps and melting systems to redirect water flow. The city engineer had explained how thermal dynamics and gravitational flow could turn small water sources into major flooding events. Karen thought she'd buried me. She had no idea she'd just provided the raw materials for the most spectacular act of hydraulic revenge in HOA history. While documenting the toxic dump with my camera, every angle, every truck, every shovelful captured with timestamp precision, I started calculating volumes and flow rates. 200 cubic yards of contaminated snow. When melted rapidly with industrial equipment, that becomes roughly 15,000 gallons of toxic runoff. Add pumps to control direction, and you could create a flash flood that would make no one nervous. Mrs. Violet had witnessed the entire operation from her kitchen window, phone in hand recording Karen's explicit instructions. Bob Martinez caught the city trucks being redirected from their normal disposal route. Even better, my new security cameras had captured Karen's own words as she told the crew I had volunteered my property, a complete fabrication that would look gorgeous in criminal court. But here's where Karen's amateur hour environmental terrorism became absolutely perfect. During my obsessive research into HOA regulations, I discovered that our original 1987 covenant explicitly prohibited snow storage on residential lots. Karen had just violated the foundational law of our community while committing about 15 different city, county, and state environmental crimes. As I stood there breathing toxic fumes and watching my buried truck disappear under Karen's revenge fantasy, I realized she'd just armed me with the ultimate weapon. She wanted to weaponize winter against me? Perfect. I was about to show her what happens when you give an electrician control over water flow, thermal systems, and gravitational physics. Some people bury their problems. Smart people redirect them straight back to the source, with interest. While digging through property records for my inevitable lawsuit, I discovered something that flipped this entire war on its head and handed me weapons I never knew existed. Thursday afternoon found me drowning in the county clerk's basement, surrounded by file boxes that smelled like decades of bureaucratic neglect and broken dreams. The fluorescent lights flickered with that particular seizure-inducing frequency that screams, "Installed by the lowest bidder in 1987. I'd been cross-referencing HOA documents for hours, my eyes burning from microfilm readers that belonged in a museum, when I hit pay dirt. The original Maplewood Estates covenant, buried under 20 layers of amendments, like legal archaeology. Page 47, Section 12. 8. Subsection C practically glowed on the yellowed paper. Storage of snow, ice, or winter precipitation on residential lots is expressly prohibited to prevent drainage and foundation damage. Karen had just violated the foundational law of our own community while committing environmental terrorism. The irony was so perfect, it should have been framed. But that discovery was nothing compared to what my paralegal friend Sarah uncovered about Karen's insurance situation. Sarah's office smelled like vanilla coffee, an impending legal doom, as she spread the HOA's liability documents across her desk, like a poker player revealing a royal flush. "Look at this exclusion clause," she said, practically purring with professional satisfaction. "Their coverage specifically excludes punitive or retaliatory actions taken by board members acting outside their authority." Karen wasn't just being vindictive, she was personally liable for every penny of damage. My brain started calculating like a human spreadsheet. Property damage, 12 grand for lawn restoration, soil contamination cleanup, 8,000 for testing and replacement of poisoned earth, lost wages, 2,400 for missed emergency calls, including that children's hospital generator that had to wait for backup technicians. But here's where the math became absolutely beautiful. Minnesota environmental law carries automatic penalties for illegal dumping of contaminated materials. $500 per cubic yard, no judicial discretion required. 200 cubic yards of toxic snow equals $100,000 in automatic fines, plus cleanup costs, plus legal fees, plus punitive damages for intentional environmental crimes. Karen was staring at a $250,000 personal liability for her snow dump tantrum. The real nuclear weapon was hidden in Karen's financial records, public information thanks to her real estate license and Doug's city council position. Sarah's forensic accounting skills had uncovered a financial house of cards that was already collapsing. "She's completely broke," Sarah announced, highlighting key numbers with the grim satisfaction of someone discovering their enemy has been firing blanks. Nasty divorce 2 years ago cleaned her out. Real estate business hemorrhaging cash since interest rates spiked. Maybe $30,000 in actual assets, and a house mortgage deeper than the Mariana Trench. The coup de grace? Karen's real estate license was already under state investigation for ethics violations, using HOA authority to pressure homeowners into using her services, conflict of interest violations, abuse of fiduciary duty. My case would be the final nail in that particular coffin. But here's what made this discovery absolutely perfect. I didn't want her money. Money disappears into legal fees and bureaucratic black holes. What I wanted was complete and total destruction of her power structure, followed by systematic reform that would protect every future resident from suburban dictators. Karen had handed me the perfect weapon disguised as an environmental disaster. Her own snow, her own violations, her own financial vulnerability. All I needed was the right delivery system to turn her weapon against her entire power structure. The original covenant was crystal clear about fair enforcement and community standards. Karen had violated every principle she'd sworn to uphold, and I had the documentation to prove it. Time to show her what happens when you declare war on someone who actually understands the rules of engagement. Some people abuse power until someone takes it away from them. I was about to become that someone, using nothing but her own stupidity and a little electrical engineering. The beauty of being a master electrician is that you think in systems. Energy flow, pressure dynamics, and what happens when you redirect massive force along carefully calculated paths. Karen had handed me 200 cubic yards of raw material and the perfect target. Time to engineer some hydraulic poetry. My first stop was industrial equipment rental, a place that reeked of diesel fuel and unlimited possibilities. Mike, the owner, had the weathered hands of someone who'd rented bulldozers to people with questionable judgment and lived to tell about it. He studied my equipment specifications with growing appreciation. Industrial snowmelter rated for 10 tons per hour, high-pressure pump system with heated circulation hoses, and synchronized timer controls? The paper crinkled as he reviewed my handwritten calculations. "You planning to relocate Lake Superior?" "Something like that," I replied, sliding over my master electrician's license. Years of industrial electrical work had taught me that the right equipment, properly configured, could move mountains, or in this case, redirect them with mathematical precision. The snow melter was pure German engineering brilliance, a massive heated drum that could liquefy 10 tons of snow per hour while maintaining consistent output temperature. Here's the technical magic. By connecting it to a variable speed pump system through insulated circulation hoses, you can control exactly where 15,000 gallons of water flows, how fast it moves, and when it arrives at its destination. Back home, I transformed my dining room into mission control, spreading city drainage maps across every surface like a hydrologist planning the perfect storm. The metallic scratch of rulers and protractors against paper became my meditation soundtrack as I calculated elevation drops, flow coefficients, and gravitational physics that would make a civil engineer weep with joy. Here's what most people don't know about suburban drainage. Neighborhoods built in the 1980s used gravity-fed storm systems designed for normal precipitation, not industrial-scale water redirection. Maplewood Estates sat in a natural depression, probably why developers got the land cheap. The existing storm drains could handle maybe 2 inches of rain per hour under ideal conditions. I was about to deliver the equivalent of 8 inches in 30 minutes, all flowing directly toward Karen's street. The electrical component was where my professional expertise became a work of art. Using industrial timer relays, the same systems that control massive HVAC units and skyscrapers, I could program the entire operation to activate remotely while I was safely documenting from Mrs. Violet's spare bedroom. Three-phase power distribution through weatherproof junction boxes would ensure continuous operation, even in sub-zero conditions. Sarah arrived that evening with legal paperwork that smelled like expensive justice and fresh printer ink. Her vanilla coffee mixed with the scent of impending accountability as she spread forms across my evidence-covered table like a dealer revealing a royal flush. Environmental complaint hits the state EPA Tuesday, she explained, tapping dates with her pen. Police report for illegal dumping Wednesday, civil lawsuit Thursday. Real estate board ethics violation Friday. By Saturday morning, she'll be drowning in bureaucracy before the actual water even starts flowing. But the real genius lay in the timing synchronization. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. Perfect timing for Karen's re-election speech to be interrupted by the sound of her street turning into a temporary river. Industrial electrical work had taught me that pressure systems fail catastrophically when you apply force at exactly the right moment. Mrs. Violet volunteered her house as surveillance headquarters, complete with professional-grade cameras positioned for optimal street-level documentation. Bob Martinez offered his hydraulic lift truck for positioning the melter unit, and his construction crew expertise for concealed hose routing. Even my union brothers had gotten involved, providing technical consultation for what they were calling innovative water management under adverse conditions. The social media warfare required its own strategic planning. Time-lapse cameras would document the entire process from Toxic Mountain to Flowing Justice, uploading real-time footage to multiple platforms for permanent documentation. The engineering beauty of watching gravity, thermal dynamics, and hydraulic pressure work in perfect harmony would be the kind of educational content that goes viral for all the right reasons. Thursday night, I ran final systems tests, while February wind howled through bare trees, like nature's own soundtrack for revenge. The heated circulation maintained perfect flow temperature, even at -10 degrees. A trick involving glycol additives and recirculating thermal loops that most people never see outside industrial applications. The pump system moved water at precisely calculated rates through concealed routing that would make a stealth bomber pilot proud. Friday evening, I activated the neighborhood notification system, email blasts with live streaming links, complete documentation of Karen's environmental crimes, and real-time educational content about HOA accountability. Every resident would witness firsthand what happens when suburban dictators meet someone who actually understands the physics of cause and effect. Karen had spent 8 years teaching our community that rules were weapons for targeting people she disliked. Saturday morning, she was about to discover that weapons work both ways, especially when deployed by someone who'd actually read the engineering manuals. The sweet smell of melting snow was going to become the perfume of suburban justice. Karen's panic mode kicked in faster than a short circuit tripping a breaker, and watching someone with that much unearned confidence suddenly realize they might face actual consequences was better than premium cable television. It started Thursday morning when she noticed the industrial equipment appearing in my backyard, like mechanical mushrooms after rain. The snow melter's diesel engine rumbled to life during my testing phase, sending vibrations through the frozen ground that you could feel 3 houses away. Karen appeared at her kitchen window, clutching her coffee mug like a life preserver, staring at my setup with the kind of expression usually reserved for witnessing alien abductions. By noon, she was pacing her driveway in designer winter boots, cell phone permanently attached to her ear as she tried to orchestrate damage control. The sharp click of her heels on cleared concrete created a frantic rhythm that screamed, "Someone who just realized they're completely screwed." "I need that snow removed immediately," I heard her telling various contractors through my open garage window. The cold air carried her voice with crystal clarity as she discovered that nobody in the Twin Cities was willing to touch a job involving potentially contaminated materials and possible legal liability. Apparently, word travels fast in the snow removal industry when environmental crimes are involved. Her desperation reached comedy gold levels when she appeared in my driveway at 6 p.m., holding a snow shovel like she was planning to personally relocate Mount Kilimanjaro, one scoop at a time. The sight of a woman who'd never done manual labor in her life, attempting to move 200 cubic yards of contaminated snow, was so pathetic it almost made me feel sorry for her. The smear campaign launched Friday morning with the subtlety of a fire alarm at 3 a.m. Karen started spreading rumors about my mental instability to anyone who'd listen, claiming I was dangerous and obsessed with revenge. She suggested to Bob Martinez that my electrical work might be substandard, and implied to Mrs. Violet that I might be planning something violent in response to a simple neighborhood disagreement. What Karen didn't know was that Mrs. Violet had been recording every conversation on her phone since the snow dump incident. Watching someone dig their own grave with their mouth while thinking they're being clever is like watching a masterclass in self-destruction. The bribery attempts came next, delivered with all the finesse of a sledgehammer to the face. Karen approached Mrs. Violet with $500 cash to reconsider her testimony about the snow dumping operation. She offered Bob free real estate services if he'd stay quiet about witnessing the city trucks being redirected. She even tried to bribe me directly, promising to drop all HOA violations if I'd stop this nonsense and behave like a reasonable neighbor. Every attempted bribe was secretly recorded by neighbors who'd grown tired of Karen's suburban terrorism and were ready to document her desperation. The woman was creating more evidence against herself than a drunk driver at a sobriety checkpoint. But the real entertainment started when Doug, Karen's city councilman husband, decided to weaponize his political position like he was running a third-world dictatorship instead of serving a Minnesota suburb. Friday afternoon, I received a phone call that reeked of corruption through the receiver. "This is Councilman Whitmore," Doug announced, in the kind of voice that thinks it carries weight. "I understand you're harassing my wife over some trivial neighborhood dispute. That needs to stop immediately." "Trivial?" I replied, unable to keep the amusement out of my voice. "Your wife illegally dumped contaminated snow on my property, using city equipment and resources. That's environmental terrorism, not a neighborhood dispute." "Karen is a respected community leader," Doug continued, apparently reading from some script about protecting corrupt spouses. "Your continued harassment could affect your business licenses and future permit applications. The city takes a dim view of contractors who can't get along with their neighbors." The beautiful thing about Doug's threat was that he just created a perfect paper trail of corruption and abuse of office. Using city position to threaten citizens filing legitimate complaints? That's the kind of behavior that ends political careers and creates federal investigations. "Are you threatening to abuse your governmental authority to protect your wife from the consequences of environmental crimes?" I asked, making sure my voice recorder caught every syllable. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear Doug's political career circling the drain in real time. Meanwhile, Karen had filed a fraudulent insurance claim, forging my signature on a fake agreement claiming I'd given permission for temporary snow storage. Insurance fraud carries mandatory minimum sentences, and insurance investigators take falsified documents about as seriously as the IRS takes unreported income. The woman was creating felony charges faster than I could document them, turning a simple property dispute into a criminal case that would make law and order writers jealous. Saturday morning was less than 12 hours away, and Karen was about to discover that some people fight back with more than just lawyers and paperwork. Sometimes you get to watch someone destroy their entire life in real time, and it's absolutely beautiful. Karen's final desperate gambit arrived like a last-ditch military assault, complete with the kind of strategic stupidity that would make Sun Tzu weep. When bribery and intimidation failed, she decided to go nuclear with an emergency HOA board meeting designed to expel me from the community entirely. The meeting notice appeared on Saturday morning, 3 hours before my hydraulic revenge was scheduled to activate, with all the legal validity of a crayon drawing. Karen had called an emergency session to address my disruptive behavior and gross violations of community standards, planning to ram through a vote before I could mount any defense. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. Karen was violating the very procedural rules she'd been enforcing for 8 years, while accusing me of being disruptive. Emergency meetings require documentation of imminent threats, proper notification periods, and quorum verification. Karen's notice had none of these, making her proposed expulsion about as legally binding as a fortune cookie. But here's where her desperation transformed into outright criminal behavior. While I was inside making final adjustments to my pump systems, Karen decided to sabotage my equipment with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball through a china shop. My security cameras captured the entire performance in beautiful high-definition detail. There's Karen at 5 a.m., creeping across my backyard in designer winter gear, like the world's most incompetent cat burglar, carrying bolt cutters that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. The metallic snap of cutting tools echoed through the pre-dawn silence as she attempted to disable my heated hoses and electrical connections. What Karen didn't understand, because suburban real estate agents don't typically receive training in industrial electrical systems, was that I designed multiple redundancies into my setup. Cutting one set of connections would automatically activate backup circuits, while tampering with the equipment would trigger motion sensors and floodlights that turn my backyard brighter than a football stadium. The look on Karen's face when those lights hit was pure comedy gold. Criminal destruction of property elevates disputes from civil to criminal court, carrying mandatory jail time, regardless of the perpetrator's social status or real estate credentials. Karen had just upgraded herself from neighborhood nuisance to actual felon, complete with video evidence that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Meanwhile, Doug was using his counsel position to threaten anyone associated with supporting my case. He called the rental company to suggest my equipment permits might face extra scrutiny. He warned local contractors about associating with troublemakers who filed frivolous complaints against respected community leaders. He even implied that my union's political endorsements might be reconsidered if they continued supporting disruptive elements. Every threat created a beautiful paper trail of abuse of office that federal investigators love to discover. Doug was essentially building his own corruption case one phone call at a time, documenting how elected officials use government power to protect their wives from environmental crime consequences. The community response was shifting faster than Minnesota weather. Word had spread through the neighborhood about Karen's midnight snow dump operation, and people were starting to connect dots they'd ignored for years. Mrs. Peterson remembered getting cited for her garden gnomes, while the doctor's flamingo collection went unmolested. The Hendersons realized their basketball hoop violations had coincided with Karen's attempts to list their house. Even the retired judge on Maple Street admitted he'd been wondering about the selective enforcement patterns. Social media was exploding with real-time documentation of Karen's meltdown. The local Nextdoor app had become a running commentary on suburban corruption, complete with photographs of Karen's failed sabotage attempt and recordings of Doug's threatening phone calls. The story was getting picked up by housing justice advocates and viral content creators who specialized in exposing HOA abuse. The state EPA had confirmed soil contamination from the illegally dumped snow, triggering automatic cleanup orders and criminal penalties that couldn't be negotiated away, regardless of Karen's connections or Doug's political pressure. Environmental violations carry federal oversight, meaning local corruption becomes irrelevant when the EPA decides to investigate. But the most beautiful development was Karen's real estate license investigation, accelerating towards professional licensing boards don't care about local politics. They care about ethics violations and criminal convictions. As Saturday morning approached, Karen was facing criminal charges, federal environmental violations, professional license suspension, personal bankruptcy, and the complete destruction of her suburban kingdom. She'd declared war on the wrong electrician, and the bill was about to come due with compound interest. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of February day that makes Minnesota winters almost bearable if you're about to witness spectacular suburban justice. At exactly 9 a.m., while Karen was presumably practicing her re-election speech, my German-engineered revenge system, heated pumps began circulating 15,000 gallons of liquefied vindication through insulated hoses, following the carefully calculated path toward Karen's street with gravitational inevitability. The thermal cameras Mrs. Violet had installed captured every gorgeous detail as Mount Kilimanjaro transformed into a raging torrent of poetic justice. The visual spectacle exceeded every engineering calculation. 200 cubic yards of contaminated snow became a brown river carrying cigarette butts, McDonald's wrappers, road salt, and all the toxic debris Karen had dumped on my property. The flow carved temporary channels through winter. Her pristine white Lexus sat marooned like an expensive boat anchor, surrounded by swirling brown water that carried the unmistakable aroma of her own environmental terrorism coming home to roost. The timing was absolutely perfect. Local news crews had arrived just as the water reached peak flow, drawn by social media posts and neighbor tips about unprecedented suburban flooding caused by HOA corruption. Live broadcasts captured Karen emerged from her house at 10:30, clearly planning to wade through the flood to reach the community center for her re-election meeting. The sight of a woman in designer winter gear, sloshing through contaminated water she'd created herself, was the kind of visual metaphor that makes journalism professors weep with professional admiration. The annual HOA meeting had been moved to the community center's upper floor. The lower level was flooded from storm drains backing up under the unexpected hydraulic pressure. Over 100 residents attended instead of the usual 12, drawn by curiosity about the chaos and Karen's role in creating it. I arrived fashionably dry, carrying evidence folders that chronicled 8 years of corruption with the thoroughness of a doctoral dissertation. The room buzzed with conversation that stopped dead when Karen squelched in 20 minutes late, her expensive boots leaving puddles of poetic justice on the community center carpet.
Ladies and gentlemen, I began when Karen called the meeting to order, with water still dripping from her designer jacket. Before we discuss leadership elections, I think everyone deserves to understand what's been happening in our community. The presentation unfolded like a legal thriller. Then came the legal ambush that transformed the meeting into a crime scene. Police officers served Karen with criminal charges for illegal dumping, environmental violations, and criminal destruction of property, all timed to arrive during her re-election speech. The EPA inspector delivered cleanup orders. The room fell silent except for the sound of dripping water from Karen's clothes and the distant rumble of news helicopters circling overhead. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Karen as